Well, if I had one word to sum up the story I just read, it'd be bittersweet. It was encouraging to see it end on a hopeful note, with an acknowledgement of lingering melancholy, but likewise the goodwill and support of people in place to allow for healing. That's my jam right there. As the Christ once said, "In this world you will have trouble, but be of good cheer. I have overcome the world." Returning home isn't a Christian story, but there is a form of godliness in the wisdom it contains. So as not to get ahead of myself on that front, let me do my usual thing and summarize with commentary. It will remind me of things I want to say. Alright, so Misty and the crew wake up on a random day of Ash's Pokemon journey to find him gone. Right away, Kate Rayearth highlights the beginning of Misty's anxiety, a small thing that one wouldn't necessarily expect to descend down the slope of doom. Why would it? Ash could have simply stepped away momentarily to answer a call of nature. As Ash later explains, that was, in fact, the initial case. But it didn't stop there. I briefly tried looking up the definition of the fear for when someone precious vanishes. Something phobia. Couldn't find one. I guess I shouldn't be surprised. It's quite a relatable fear, even for an introvert like me, and hardly an irrational one. When all the probable avenues have been explored and the disappearance drags on, well, we've all heard the stories of kidnapping and trafficking. It's statistically unlikely, yet still far too common. And all the while, the not knowing just compounds your anxiety. That's how it is for Misty. We see the manifest behaviors that come with it in her. Difficulty breathing, the inability to properly eat and sleep, irrationally thinking she's at fault, self-punishment like lip-biting and nail-digging. It's relentless. I didn't enjoy reading any part of it, but I did find it enlightening. In the likely event that I too am one day in this kind of situation, I'd prefer to have an idea of what it's like beforehand. I don't want to be further traumatized by my own strange behaviors, wondering why I'm doing harm to myself. As I've said, it's wisdom. Wisdom is steadfast and allows some measure of comfort, even in the blackest grief. Speaking of comfort, Brock's characterization really lives up to his reputation. While Misty spirals emotionally downward in Ash's ongoing disappearance, Brock remains sturdy as a rock. He provides rationalizations to explain Ash's absence, suggesting he could be here or there. Hey, we still need to eat. Maybe the smell of food on the fire will draw him. Hey, it's raining. Maybe he took shelter at the Pokemon Center. Brock constantly voices reason and positivity, stoically doing what he can to keep Misty sane. He's a true bro. He's the kind of person you'd want around in times of crisis. His only real mistake is assuring Misty that they'll find him, when that's not something he can promise. Oh, they find him. Or, well, they find a body, and the police say that it's Ash. It's confirmation of the worst possible outcome. Misty is with Mrs. Ketchum at the time of the discovery. They experience the bitter camaraderie of having their hearts broken in the same minute. It gets me wondering which is worse, knowing or not knowing. While you're in doubt, there is at least the possibility that all may yet turn out well. At the same time, you have good reason to believe that your hope will betray you, and all the while, that not knowing keeps you from functioning, from living properly. But knowing, assuming that it's a hopeless knowing, is like the pain of a pulled tooth. The absence of what you once had is constantly felt, especially during the parts of your life that he or she once affected. You may be able to blissfully forget for a while, until you are forcibly reminded again. Kate Raworth does not give a definitive answer here, so far as I could tell. I mean, she does bring up that the pain of loss, fresh at the time, is like sharp glass, but in the healing that comes with time, it dulls, like the glass's edge that has spent years in the ocean. Without personal knowledge, here's what I think. Gun to my head? The sharp knowledge of recent loss is the worst. Then it scales down to a point where it's on par with the anxiety of not knowing. Then finally, it becomes a lesser pain. Take that with a large grain of salt. I think it's beside the point that both pains are emotionally excruciating. Now, for a different point that Kate did not bring up. What of God? Now, follow me on this. It isn't the non sequitur it may seem. We appreciate the story because the character's grief is rational. But why is it rational? We're all doomed to die anyway. Even if humanity develops the necessary technology to somehow escape the heat death of the universe, eventually, all life will end. Then, all our deeds will be vain. They will have always been vain. If there was a first cause, there will be a last effect. So why is anything, including grief, ultimately rational? It can only be rational if there is something or someone who lives from everlasting to everlasting with memory. Moreover, it must be a standard keeper's memory. Something that is able to morally determine that it is better to bake a pie for a widow than to kick a puppy. This I call God. Vague and oversimplified, but enough to go on. Nothing but an everlasting standard keeper with a memory can ultimately rationalize our lives. So, what of God, who knew of the evil Team Rocket kidnapping and the grief it caused Ash's friends? Where was he? Why was the Eternal Standard Keeper content to do nothing but mark a tally on the cosmic scorecard? The story of returning home may be fictional, but it's an apt illustration of how real-life tragedies feel. The question is fair. Is God's non-interference policy in keeping with his own standards? How can it be? If you had godly power, and you were there when Giovanni's thugs pounced on Ash, wouldn't you have done something? That's the very thought which haunts Misty over and over the course of the next year. If only I'd been awake. If only I could have done something. I think we all agree that justice demands a response. That's the standard we all live together by. Thus, it's all the more perplexing when bad things happen to regular people, and the mighty Standard Keeper lets them. I'll get back to Misty in a minute, but I need to give my follow-up. The reason that I believe in the Christian faith is that my God is not content to sit back and watch forever. He lets bad things happen, but exercises great patience before retaliation. He allows people the chance to repent of their evil, up to the moment of their deaths. Meanwhile, while we live, it is in the hands of men to interact using God's standards, or shirk them. Either way, there is a final judgment, and the thought of it may be consolation to the wronged, and a terror to the wicked. It helps me maintain perspective. As for people like Misty, there are other coping mechanisms. Moving back in with her family, focusing on chores, the gym, having friends check in, like Brock and Mrs. Ketchum. Even frenemies, like Jesse, James, and Meowth, who deliver baked goods out of sympathy. All of these are well and good for overcoming grief. But I still say that they are distant second supplementals. Without the fundamental perspective of God, well, time may heal your wounds, but you'll go with a limp for the rest of your days. Now comes the cornerstone scene from which this whole narrative was born. After a year of slow emotional recovery, Misty awakes one morning to a knock at the gym's door. The sun's not even up yet. People don't socialize at this hour. It's why, when she sees a living, breathing Ash Ketchum standing at her door, Misty's brain cracks. She reasons to herself that she's still dreaming, or having an episode, and it's a sensible hypothesis. Nevertheless, here he is, solid, speaking, and even bleeding. It raises about 1 trillion questions, which will have to wait for now. How do people handle this kind of thing? It's not something you can prepare for. Not after the terrible doubt of anxiety has been followed by the black grief of knowing that you'll never see your loved one again on this side of mortality. Still, even as your beliefs are shaken down to their foundations, time moves relentlessly forward. The present demands action. Pretty much any rational move you make is a testament to the human's enduring spirit. So, while Misty goes through the mundane motions of inviting Ash in, feeding him, and fixing his wounds, one can appreciate the magnitude of the situation. Kate Rayer's writing style does a marvelous job of executing it. Ash is closed off and paranoid from his year in Team Rocket. Between the beatings, his eventual complicity, and Giovanni's poisonous words, he's been conditioned to believe that he is a corrupted person. The Rocket boss is his own father, after all. Giovanni kidnapped him with intentions to make Ash his eventual heir. This makes Ash a major priority, and his escape from Team Rocket is intolerable. Come hell or high water, he will be rooted out eventually, and then God have mercy on whoever temporarily harbored him. Ash hates himself for running to Misty and putting a target on her back. He knows better. He knows that Team Rocket is everywhere, even the police. But he needed to see a friendly face, just for a little bit. Well, Misty isn't about to let Ash go. Even when she is made to appreciate the gravity of the situation, she is determined to do something, anything, rather than lose him again. She calls the level-headed Brock for help, and he becomes next to find out that Ash's death was a conspiracy. Then come Jesse, James, and Meowth, who were utterly innocent despite being Team Rocket insiders. Then Ash's mother, who had the greatest right of them all to know that Ash was alive. Then Misty's sister Daisy, who had to be called back to maintain the gym. Then finally, Mrs. R, the only person who might truly be able to keep Ash safe. All of these people, except possibly Mrs. R, will now be marked for death. They have information that will lead to the arrest of Boss Giovanni. And his agents have been tracking Ash almost the whole time. Ash is aware. In fact, it's a wonder that Giovanni hasn't already made a move by the time Mrs. Ketchum sees her son alive. Ash is becoming an ever-increasing liability. The more people who know, the greater the chance that more people are gonna get told. I think that had I been Giovanni, I would have sprung my ambush in Pallet Town. Ash certainly thought so. By the time his group meets up with Mrs. R, I'm convinced that the boss was hours from calling an end to the whole charade. Too much fallout. Criminal intrigue was one of this story's strongest selling points for me. I like that it reminds readers of the very real shenanigans that go on in our own societies. These days especially, when it's obvious. You know, when the criminals are smiling in our faces and insisting that nobody is above the law. Meanwhile, we have yet to see Epstein's client list. We have a border that's been insecure for years, and in tandem, legislation to permit illegal aliens to vote. Prosecutions with intent to jail one's chief political rival. Giovannis are everywhere. We just don't see them. They're the ones who pull the strings of the puppets we do see on camera. Alright, that's enough of that tangent. Anyway, I realized that I glossed over the varying permutations of shock and distress that the characters exhibit seeing Ash alive. No need for more, I've said what I needed to on that front already. The only incident I'd like to examine closer is the evening at the Ketchum residence. The distress of Ash's mom is transparent as glass. Ash, however, is harder to read. You can tell that he's initially uncertain if he should forgive her for letting a man like Giovanni be his sire. But that's about it. What else is going on in his head? He's pretty closed off, but I can guess at the volatile mixture brewing in his brain. Some of it is leftover numbness to shows of affection. Some of it is quiet desperation to feel at home again. Some is lingering suspicion that his mother held back something. Some is self-loathing that a rocket's presence should sully the sacred ground of his home. Him being that rocket. Little leftover conditioning. There's maybe a spark of joy, like a live wire with a slightly severed connection. More abundant, however, is the nagging feeling that any minute, a squad of rocket strongmen will come swarming in to bag him. The others would be subdued, then left to burn when they torch the house. He's seen it before. I'm sure I've left one or two things out. Still, with this context, it's easy to understand why he's balling his fists and clenching his jaw so frequently. There are two categories of bad people. Those who don't fully comprehend the amount of damage they inflict, and those who do. In the former category, you've got street thugs who hold you at gunpoint, demanding the $100 in your wallet. Let's say this guy doesn't get his jollies from the rush of power it gives him. He just wants some drinking money. He doesn't grasp the ramifications. That his victim will now be paranoid, plagued with repeat nightmares of that encounter for weeks to come, a little more cynical towards his fellow men ever after. All that, and he didn't even pull the trigger. All that for $100. I'd pay thrice that just to be spared all the added trauma. Now, consider the latter category, the afflictor whose primary objective is the misery. The first guy's an inconsiderate dick, but this guy's a devil incarnate. He would engineer and unleash a deadly virus just to watch people panic and scramble. His moral compass acknowledges the existence of good, just so that he can lean far the other way into evil. He would eat the nightmares of his victims if he could, drink their pain, inject their misery right into his veins. But the best he can do is observe the screams and writhing, and indulge his imagination. Psychopaths like these are damned motivated, and will naturally thrive in the criminal world. They have a self-interest that prompts other men to evil. In nearly every one of Ash's flashbacks to his time with Giovanni, the boss smiles at his pain. There's never a time when he loses his patience and says something like, "Damn it, son! Why must you make me do this? I'm only trying to prepare you for greatness." No, having a suitable heir is merely necessary. The fun's in the process. For a man with so much paperwork, Giovanni sure sets aside a lot of time to loiter around, watching Ash's beatings. There are those who might consider his character too evil, a challenge to their suspension of disbelief. But that's likely because they've had the good fortune of not knowing their own Giovanni. I haven't, thank God, but I've read about the life of Muhammad and his incident with the Khaybar Jews. It turns out, not only have Giovannis been around for thousands of years, but some are even venerated. Anyway, Ash knows he can't fight, and he can't keep running. His only option is to hide, and that means putting his trust in rogue rocket agents. Enter the best character in this whole story, Mrs. Quid Pro Quo, Mrs. R. From the moment she enters the scene, she emanates Grandma Gigachad vibes. Golden eyes, fire reflecting in her glasses, aura of mystery, and a prior vote of confidence from Jesse and James. I thought that she was Elite Four Agatha initially, but Kate Raworth deliberately eliminated the possibility by stating that Agatha ran Viridian Gym. Whatever, she's freaking cool. Mrs. R is level-headed and speaks with Misty's companions on a need-to-know basis. Who is she? A lesser agent in charge of making police records vanish. Why is she here? Giovanni threatened her family when she tried to back out of Team Rocket. What does she want? Gym access, perhaps, as a safe rendezvous point for future rebel meetings. The general support of Kanto gym leaders. What does she offer in return? A safe house for the boss's wayward son to hide away in. And a little inside information from her own Team Rocket source. The fact that she knew where to meet so as to avoid Rocket spies is another mark in her favor. Ash doesn't trust her at first. Not that he trusts anyone from Team Rocket, but Mrs. R has an intimidating air about her. A spooky old lady, like Master Genkai from Yu Yu Hakusho, or Margaret Parangoski from Halo. That said, she's the sort of person you want on your side, and it's not like he's got a lot of options. Misty and Brock vow to stick it out with him in the safe house for a couple of days at least, and he reluctantly agrees. Remember, Ash still considers himself a bad person. Ever since Giovanni tortured him into obedience, he's been robbing and hurting people on the boss's orders. Now, he's selfishly gone and made his friends targets, and they may end up dying in the line of a friend's duty for him. All the while, he'll be in something like another prison with rocket guards, people pretending to help him, but who might turn on him the moment it becomes convenient. It's not to be wondered at that he remains withdrawn and pessimistic. Misty and Brock try their best to keep up his spirits, with limited success. Talk about trying to make the best of a bad situation. Now, we've been hearing the story from exclusively two perspectives, Misty's and Ash's. I'm glad that Kate Raworth took that approach. It allows us to sympathize for both characters, while observing the effects they have on each other. Ash's state of perpetual withdrawal is understandable, but also very frustrating. If you're Misty, and you've been taking care of Ash for several days, sacrificing everything to help shoulder his burden, even risking your life, you'd think that should merit a bit more positive feedback than the obligatory gratitude. Ash is making for some weighty emotional baggage. Sorry, he is. It was gratifying to see Misty finally chew him out when he attempted to flee Mrs. R's negotiations, to remind him that, hard as he's had it, she and the others have suffered too in his absence. It's a little lesson to the attentive reader as well. Even when you have reason to feel melancholy, you must get a handle on it around others. Your feelings must not rule you. That's not to say, go in the other direction, wear a mask, and pretend everything is fine. Faking it, similar to pushing down your feelings, will only make you lose sight of who you are. Mastering yourself is not easy, but unless you do, you will be mastered by others of stronger will. Wisdom begets wisdom. I really like that this story allows me so many opportunities to meditate on life. It helps in strengthening my own willpower. Alright, so now comes the safe house bunker chapters. And I'm sorry to say, this was the slowest part of the story for me. Maybe it was done that way purposefully on the author's part, considering that sitting about anxiously, with nothing to do, makes for slow days. But it doesn't help. I was bored here. I don't remember a whole lot of it. Let's see. Mrs. R calls in and informs the party that Giovanni is sending out search teams, meaning that he was indeed spying on Ash before, but has now genuinely lost his trail. Good news. However, Brock and Misty shouldn't linger too long in the safe house with Ash, lest they draw too much of Giovanni's ire. He'll kill them for keeping his son from his clutches. Better for them to be at their own gyms, so that it's harder for him to kill them without drawing unwanted attention to himself. Also, as the two safehouse guards remind them, the gym leaders can only stay for so long to verify the safehouse's security. They made a deal. They'll need to hold up their end soon. In the meantime, we get more insight on Ash's time in Team Rocket. After submitting himself to end the pain, he was sent on various missions, always with an escort of Giovanni's men. He tried to run once, when they killed a man for his daughter's shiny Eevee. A tracker foiled him. One time, he had to bring in an Elite Four member's relative and lash him with a whip afterward. His final mission, in which he escaped to Misty's gym, was a moonstone heist. The Zubats of Mount Moon distracted Ash's wranglers. I beg your pardon. It was a cave-in, and he managed to flee in the confusion. However, he had to beat one of them to death with a stone before it was over. Ash's mantra at this point was essentially, be the lesser evil. He'd accepted the inevitability of Giovanni's will. One way or another, the breaking and pillaging would happen. At the very least, he could fill the boots of another rocket and cause less harm to his victims than another grunt would have. Even so, the work tortured his soul. He hated himself for not being stronger, for eventually caving after so many weeks of being starved and beaten. But, as George Orwell once observed, in the face of pain, there are no heroes. No heroes. I'd like to think that, if I am ever put through torture without end, I would remain true to my principles. But I don't know. I can't know until it happens. After a while, it would be very tempting to do as Ash did, and come to a sort of compromise with myself. I might. If the ramifications were small, if I were merely made to carry the enemy's bags for him or something, I might try to alleviate my suffering. The one thing I would never do is forsake the name of Christ, my Savior. That, at least, is a comforting thought for keeping my soul intact. If the skeptic should wonder how I can make such a bold promise after just admitting my self-doubt in the face of torture, he has not yet meditated enough on the afterlife. He does not fully appreciate its weighty significance. But in a scenario where my life has been reduced to pain? Oh, you better believe I'll be considering the afterlife more than I've ever had before. The yearning for sweet release is kinda baked into it. Unfortunately for Ash, he's only 13 or 14. He hasn't lived to my age, or had time to develop the mindset of blessed assurance that comes from the gospel of redemption. All he knows is that he did wrong, is still doing wrong, and the guilt gnaws at him. When Misty insists that he's still a good person, he doesn't buy it. And he's convinced that when he does confess the fullness of his sins to her, she will be disgusted and withdraw from him. Giovanni told him as much, that he would never be forgiven. Look, I know how much this afterword is turning into a sermon, but come on! It's like I'm being baited here. Giovanni is basically Satan, and Ash's thoughts towards Misty are essentially the sinner's towards God. He doesn't realize that, when he does confess, he will be embraced, forgiven, and loved. That is how my God is. He loved even before, even knowing the shameful truth of things. Notice that I didn't call it an unconditional love. There is a condition. One must acknowledge that he is a sinner. God's standard is nothing short of perfection, and being a pretty good person compared to most other people doesn't cut it. Anyone who says, "I'm a good person, I don't need forgiveness," has already missed the mark. The afterlife is eternity. Living on with an eternally stained soul is a fate worse than death. I cannot overemphasize this. We wouldn't suffer a minute of walking around in soiled underpants if we could help it, much less a day. Infinitely less all the days, forever and ever. God's answer to sin has always been the same: kill it. He loves the sinner, but hates the sin. That is why he himself came to earth as a man, lived a sinless life as only he could, then traded his wholesomeness to us, taking in exchange all the evil in the world. In some deep, spiritual, metaphysical way that I have no wisdom to explain, when he died, he took away the sins of humanity, past and future. We may still do bad things, but we are already forgiven. All we have left to do is repent and accept Jesus Christ as Lord. He died, and he rose again. There is no power of fear left in death. Well, I didn't think I'd be doing it, but there it is, the gospel of salvation. I appreciate your indulgence, dear listener, so I'll get back to returning home now. As we know, Mrs. R's people betray her trust and betray our heroes. At long last, Ash's hand is forced, and he goes feral on the first rocket. Before he has time to feel properly ashamed that his friends saw him for what he's become, the second crisis hits. That is to say, the second rocket puts a bullet in Misty's Gyarados, and Misty has to blast her with a hyper beam. This convinces Ash, beyond all further doubt, that his presence is corrosive to his friends. Because of him, Gyarados might be dead, and Misty might be a killer. Neither turn out to be the case, but next time... No. Ash resolves to not let there be a next time, and runs off to surrender himself. It's amazing how fast I can summarize plot points when I leave out the angst. That's one critique that I've been overdue in making. The overabundance of, woe is me, life is suffering. Was a lot of it necessary? Yes, but a lot of it wasn't. There is such a thing as laying it on too thick. If you make a drinking game out of the number of times that people bite their lips, or dig in their nails, or say nothing, you just might induce alcohol poisoning. I love how thoughtful this story is, how wise. The pity party stuff got obnoxious after a while. Okay, so Misty and Brock notice Ash's second disappearance, and after a fruitless search, curse him for his stupidity. Now, I personally think that's debatable. On the one hand, yes, Ash's running was stupid. After all, his plan was to throw himself on the mercy of Satan's favorite drinking buddy. Of all people, Ash should have known best that he'd have no leverage in demanding Giovanni leave his friends alone. Knowing him, the boss Rocket would probably just order Ash to kill them himself. What do you think, dear listener? Does that seem probable? Now, on the other hand, if Ash's plan isn't to trade complicity for mercy, but rather to kill the boss, it's not so stupid after all. There's been a paradigm shift active since the moment Ash knocked on Misty's door. Mrs. R confirmed his suspicions that Giovanni was spying on him. Every person he encountered, confirming himself alive to, is another witness against his staged death. Misty, Brock, Mom, even Daisy must now be silenced. Giovanni will not tolerate their continued existence. But by that same token, Ash will not tolerate their execution. They're his most precious people. He will kill Giovanni before letting them die. Before, it was just robberies and inflicting pain on people he didn't know. Now, it's as personal as it gets. Back with Misty and Brock, they convince Jesse and James to call up Mrs. R for another meeting. The old woman reemerges, and we get confirmation that she, at least, remains a good faith actor. That said, her continuing advice for the gym leaders to lie low sits poorly with Misty, who is already close to cracking. It's hard to sit still when the one you love is likely getting kicked and beaten that very moment. Misty ends the meeting requesting a gun. Based. Look, I'm not normally one to advocate allowing weapons to 14-year-olds with frayed nerves and sleep deprivation, but when I think about the very real threat that caused Misty's distress in the first place, it suddenly becomes quite reasonable. I mean, shortly after target practice, she returns to her gym, only to discover that some creep from Team Rocket is now watching the place. At that point, her decision is entirely vindicated. If he gets blasted for trespassing, and I'm on the jury during Misty's trial, she's walking. The final straw comes when Mrs. R reports in, all but confirming that Team Rocket has Ash again. Misty made a promise to Ash's mom back at her residence, vowing no harm would befall him this time. Well, this is what comes of making promises you can't keep. Feeling that she's out of options, Misty makes a snap judgment. She'll go to Rocket headquarters herself and get him out, or die trying. Think about the magnitude of corruption in the Kanto region required for Misty to resort to this. Team Rocket's headquarters is hardly a secret. Even peons like James knows the way there. The team commits crime on a daily basis, sporting their R uniforms in public sometimes. There's a prison area built into the basement of their complex. In spite of all this, there's nobody available to raid these criminals and disband them? Where's the Kanto FBI or the CIA? Are they too busy virtue signaling about diversity or carrying out psychological operations on the public? How many of them are in Giovanni's pocket? 60%? 90? Here's the dirty secret about the Team Rockets of the world. They're not the only criminals. They're merely the most flamboyant. To maintain control, criminals must collude with other criminals at the top, so that nobody ever gets held accountable for anything. I imagine they have a system for who gets in, some dirt that they can all have on each other, so that the destruction is mutually assured if anyone steps out of line and squeals to the public. Lance is the head of the Elite Four. Why has he been so deaf to the cries of Team Rocket's many victims? Perhaps it's because Giovanni has footage of Lance's excursions to Epstein's Island. Just a thought. Well, at any rate, Misty takes matters into her own hands. Without a plan, she sneaks out, jostles James awake, and demands that he fly her to Rocket HQ. Her assets amount to this: transportation to location, 1 pistol, and a Rocket Insider. No Pokemon, no disguise, no real weapons training, no knowledge of the base or its protocols, no certainty that Ash is even there. It's plain to everyone that this is a suicide mission. James knows it too, but after some compelling emotional blackmail from Misty, and a little threatening, he gives in. My compliments to Kate Rayearth. She makes sure to emphasize, through other characters, how foolish Misty is being. James and Mrs. R tell her directly. Brock and Daisy can't, but it's obvious that they would have stopped her if they could. After all her outrage at Ash's stupidity, it turns out that Misty is just as bad. At least Ash's suicide mission exercised the virtue of patience. He'll wait until the rare moment that Giovanni's guard is down, then strike. But Misty? After reaching the outskirts of Team Rocket's fortress, it's plain that she'll be gunned down before she can even get close. This is where James redeems himself many times over for all the occasions in the past when he and Jesse were a nuisance. He takes Misty to the HQ. He provides her with a disguise uniform. He backs her when Mrs. R pleads for him to be reasonable. He shows her how to walk through the complex once they're in, doing the talking when needed. He saves her from the prison guard. He helps her to improvise her planning afterwards. He provides the necessary distraction to give her the opening she needs. He stands by in the getaway vehicle until she's aboard with Ash. All this while the near certainty of death or imprisonment loomed over his head. James is an effin' MVP. I still think Mrs. R is cooler, but I really admired him for sticking his neck out like that. Talk about a diamond in the rough. Now, all that said, it's during the infiltration mission that my suspension of disbelief was somewhat broken. The prison guard eventually reports Misty and James, and nobody thought to look in the storage garage? You know, the place without cameras? The place where 2 grunts came in, but 1 went missing? We're talking 20 minutes, plus the time it takes to agonize through a plan, tie someone up, and draw out a map. I appreciate that there's a bit of an apathy problem in the lower ranks, but I have trouble buying that Giovanni's tight-run ship had such a sudden lapse into incompetence. I mean, Misty braves the halls afterward, and she's still left alone. Not one suspicious grunt along the way. That moment with the rocket executive? That should have been the first time that Misty ended up taking a life. No way that dude encounters a teenage girl in the halls and doesn't think about the description on the radio. I don't care how busy he is. This is his own boss's floor. He's really gonna shirk his duty and compromise security while the boss is within shouting distance? No way. This is the weakest part of this story. On that same note, this is around when Giovanni has ordered Ash to kill Misty. When he calls Ash back in an hour later for the verdict of his decision, he's already gotten the report of 2 suspects in the base, female in teens, male in 30s. How does a man of his cunning not put 2 and 2 together? "Your friend has yet to be located," he tells Ash, stating that she was last seen in the Meowth balloon passing over Celadon City. What? How many rogue teenage girls get reported on the radio every day? Even if he wasn't informed, because such minutia is meant to be handled by middle management or whatever, Misty's description is a major point of interest for his agents right now. Kate Rayearth is a clever author 9 times out of 10, but not around here in this chapter. I'm sure that several fans have informed her of this oversight since she's posted. It's always a gut punch to think that you finally finished an airtight story, only to learn that you made a serious lapse in judgment along the way. It gets you paranoid about how many other ways you might have screwed up and failed to notice. I know. Trust me, it sucks. Alright, moving on. It's at this moment, in Giovanni's office, that all things come together. Ash has had an hour to psych himself up for killing his father, and most likely himself in the process. The boss seems to buy that he's ready to end Misty, as he's already informed Ash that Misty will die, one way or another. At least by Ash's hands, it would be quick and painless. The paper knife is there on the desk as an available improvised weapon. Giovanni's honor guards get called away to deal with the chaos that James created just then. It's an unexpected opening, possibly the last before Misty's execution. Ash lets the stakes of the situation guide his impulses. It's a damn shame that there are fathers like this. Fathers are meant to be role models of moral integrity for their children growing up. On the contrary, it is from single mother households that criminals typically come. How perverse and backwards that Ash developed his moral fiber despite living without a dad. Then as soon as Giovanni caught him, he started twisting him to evil. And the more you understand evil, the worse it gets. The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is that good men do nothing. That's why I love stories of good versus evil. They encourage the reader to do something. Ash does. He plunges the knife into Giovanni's neck, and a second later, the boss's Persian tackles him down. Strangely, Giovanni's first impulse is to call off his attack tiger, sparing his son's life. If I were being generous, I might attribute that to a last glimmer of fatherly humanity. Maybe it was. But with his last breath, Giovanni assures Ash that the two of them are alike after all. Giovanni killed his own mother to assume her place at the head of Team Rocket. Now, Ash has killed his father. Giovanni can't go letting his legacy die here. His final words are calculated to the completion of Ash's corruption, a last play to make him the worthy successor to the Syndicate. What a garbage human being. Well, there Misty finds Ash, sitting near his father's corpse, pretty much mentally destroyed. It's likely that nothing short of her presence could have snapped him out of it. But regardless, he still intends to linger, awaiting his due punishment. Misty isn't having that, after all she went through. She resolves to stay if he does. And since Ash's whole motivation was bent towards her safety, he clenches his teeth and leads her out. They're jumped by rockets just before they make it, and in that critical moment, Misty is forced to shoot two of them dead. Just like that, both Ash and Misty now have 2 deaths on their hands each. In the climax of the story, Misty makes her final gambit to take back Ash's soul. Blood dripping from her face, she points out that she's a killer too. By Ash's logic, she deserves to die. Ash protests that she had to, and Misty says that the same applies to him. Either they both deserve death, or neither of them do. When she challenges Ash to take the gun and pull the trigger on her, he can't do it. With the matter thus decided, they run for James's balloon. The 3 make it out, while the headquarters are still in chaos, and enslaved Pokemon run rampant. Best outcome possible, all things considered. It really shouldn't have worked out this well. From a narrative perspective, it didn't quite work. But Kate Raworth gets a pass in my reckoning. Bonus points for making her character so fleshed out and sympathetic. Oh, before I move on to the falling action, I expect that this next thing I have to say is preaching to the choir, if you've humored me thus far. Returning Home is not only a stunning endorsement of the Second Amendment, but a symposium piece on why the death penalty should be embraced like a long-lost lover. If we kill them, we're no better than them, my ass. Anyone who thinks Ash and Giovanni are morally equal has mental problems. This isn't me being insensitive. The author herself just made this very point. Ash gets some leeway, since killing one's own father will make anyone mentally broken, if they weren't already before. That's the theme, as the remainder of the story winds down from here. Neither Ash nor Misty have been okay for a long time. In a way, they're worse off now, despite both of their missions ending in success. The two of them are fresh killers, and they've barely even hit puberty. How are they supposed to be okay after this? How do they go about living through the days to come? Well, all one can do is keep pushing forward, doing whatever's necessary. Misty and Ash do pretty well in that practical regard. They land in Pewter City, secure a private room in the Pokemon Center, and have a talk and a cry. Good, they're flushing those stress toxins out of their system. Misty calls Brock and Daisy. Again, good. It might have been a bad move if someone was tracing their call location, but Brock is right there in town. He's had his own reasons for being anxious, but compared to the others, he'll be a huge asset for thinking straight. Or at least, I thought as much. He really ought to have gotten them all out of there quicker. That constant use of the Meowth balloon is practically begging to be found, and they still use it. Damn it, Kate. I realize that Team Rocket is in chaos at this point in time, but there will always be those who take advantage of a crisis. You're stumbling at the finish line. Alright, so they somehow make it unmolested back to Cerulean City, where Daisy gives them a second round of Brock's tearful reunion and reaming out. I can only assume that the spies watching their gyms were ordered to stand by until given permission to act. Very strictly ordered. Mrs. R's call the next morning somewhat explains why they never got the go-ahead. Retaliation against Brock and Misty was contingent on their further interference with the boss's son. Well, with Giovanni now dead, who cares about the boss's son anymore? The Iron Throne is anyone's for the taking. Mrs. R is sure to tell Misty that Team Rocket isn't done by any means. They simply have no further reason to be on Ash's case or hers. There's always another asshole, rubbing his hands in anticipation, just waiting to succeed the last one. A small-scale operation like Misty's could only ever have achieved a small-scale victory. We can be satisfied in knowing that our characters will be left alone, but it's rather sad to know that the threats and robberies will go on in the lives of others. We've seen what Team Rocket is now. It can never be unseen, and it will never be unmade. Not until people have the collective courage to stand up and strike a firmer blow than Misty and James could have alone. Perhaps we should consider this a rallying call. A story of lesser wisdom would have woven a fiction of triumph. The characters would use their superior Pokemon power to do what nobody's been able to for decades, and in a single hour, overcome Team Rocket in their own base. The heroes would succeed in style, quipping and joking the whole way through, and never losing momentum. Evil is destroyed, and peace is returned to the land. A modern epic like unto Beowulf, and about as believable. It may be candy to the ears if told right, but it wouldn't be a good story. Returning home works because it succeeds in feeling real. And speaking of the feelings that come with returning home, after Misty hangs up with Mrs. R for the final time, she accompanies Ash back to Pallet Town. There, he appears openly at last, without fear of Team Rocket storming in and turning the whole place into another Nibelheim. His reunion is somewhat liberating, somewhat awkward. He's still not okay after everything he's been through, and everyone can tell. Misty's about the only person he can talk to who can truly empathize. When they're alone, she relates to him what his mother once told her about trauma being like jagged glass. In the ocean of time, its sharp edges will gradually turn smooth. Until then, it's okay not to be okay. Ash takes it to heart. The human spirit is nothing if not resilient. Time passes, and Ash gradually builds up enough confidence to resume his Pokemon journey. Up to the day he leaves home again, he still has nightmares and PTSD, as does Misty. Nevertheless, it is getting less frequent, and the darkness does not rob them of their hopes and dreams. They'll carry on. It's an inspirational message, and one that I thoroughly endorse. If I sounded black-pilled a minute back when I said that Team Rockets of the world could never be destroyed, remember that I added a clause of exception. Corruption can only go so far before people are no longer willing to tolerate it. Meanwhile, even those suffering the worst of it can come out with their souls intact. Not everyone does, but if you have your support structures in place, if you refuse to despair, the dawn will come when your hope is rewarded. I say again, I am an optimist. And this is after reading what Kate wrote about the abject destitution of the Rocket prison, and hearing what she had Misty say about the Rockets who might have once been like Ash before succumbing to evil. We all have the choice for how we face the world. I choose to be a force for good, all the more so when I consider what evil brings. I urge you to join me. After reading this story, however much you hated evil before, you didn't hate it enough. All the pain that Misty, Ash, Brock, and the others had to be needlessly put through, it will be paid for. Vengeance is mine, says the Lord. I will repay. This is why repentance is such a big deal in Christianity. The evil Ash did to others, in order to deliver himself from the lash, cannot be undone. Even so, he showed obvious remorse for it, which is more than people like Abby ever did. Flee from evil. Have nothing to do with it. Well, I think that I'm finally ready to rate this story. I'm giving it a 9 out of 10. A perfect 10 is a unicorn, which I don't think I can award to any story, though I've jokingly given one to Phoenix Rising. However, I've already stated other reasons why Returning Home falls short of a perfect fic. Too much lip-biting, rocket incompetence, and dragged-out scenes. Coulda used more Pokemon, too. Still, these are but minor complaints. Kate Raworth is a remarkably talented author, especially when you consider that English isn't even her first language. It's one thing to be inspired, as personally felt themes allow for an earnest narrative. It's another to vary one's use of metaphor when flavoring the text, and another to pay laborious attention to detail in a way that complements the mood. Still another to convincingly sell such a variety of personalities. Not just Misty's pain and frustration, but Giovanni's cold matter-of-factness, Brock's gentle reasoning, Daisy's clumsy concern, Delia's sweet sorrow, and so on. It's a masterclass on relating the human experience, with a quality message at the end. My channel exists for fanfics such as this. I am glad to have featured it, and I hope to find future stories that rival the bar of quality it sets. Until next time, take care everyone.